Okay, so yesterday. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Patrick.
And then this is not going to be particularly in order according to session. It's just going to be common themes that I picked up out of the various discussions we had yesterday. And we started off really talking about two objectives of civil registration systems. The first is social protection, which really applies more to birth, and then there's demographic measurement and demographic monitoring, which applies to both birth and sex. These two objectives require very different levels of quality. For protection, we really need 100% of births to be registered. It's not good enough to register 95 because the 5% that aren't registered are the ones who are probably most at risk. So we really need to have 100%. So that has to be the objective from the protection point of view. From the measurement point of view, basically we can make do with anything that's adjustable. What is adjustable? Is 50% good enough? Is 90% good enough? What level of completeness? And so stepping back a minute, we also need to start with a definition of coverage before we can think about completeness, because we need to know what population it is we're talking about. So anyway, I'm going to sort of assume that we're generally talking about the same factor, national population, in which case completeness is really the coverage of that's always going to be the case, for example, in the Gulf countries, where the national population is very often the focus. So what's good enough for demographic estimation? I think this may depend on what the data source is. Basically what we need in order to be able to adjust something is an assurance that what we've got is representative of what we could have got. So we need to have, so if we've got 50%, it needs to be 50% that is representative of the total. Now, under what circumstances is that likely to be true? It's not likely to be true with 50% civil registration, because it's going to be the rich who get registered, it's going to be urban populations that get registered. We can't think that 50% is going to be representative of the population at large. For census questions and survey questions, maybe 50% is good enough, and maybe that they are going to be representative because the factors that affect completeness are going to be quite different than in the case of a civil registration system. So we really need to think about the source of data before we can decide what's good enough. I think about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Sam Preston plucked a number out of the air, which was 60%. If it was 60%, it was good enough. I think that is going to depend on where the 60% comes from. Certainly yesterday there were two very important threads. The importance of using multiple data sources. We always need multiple data sources for evaluation purposes. For evaluation, we always need to step back again. We always need to evaluate data. Regardless of where they come from, we always need to look at the quality of the data. Multiple data sources are important from that point of view because they give us a triangulation. There are other things that turn out to be very important, like very strong regularities in patterns across populations, which we can use both for evaluation of the data and for correction, potentially. Though the correction is going to depend on how strong the empirical patterns are across populations. And the second is the importance of multiple methods. So we learn things by applying multiple methods. So we should never just say, well, I like method X, I'm always going to apply method X, I'm never going to apply method Y. Let's not do that. Let's always try to apply all the methods that have got reasonably respectable track records. That said, we need to apply methods that are appropriate. And the example from yesterday, I think, was T over F ratios, where T over F ratios, using the original Brass method, assuming constant fertility, simply not appropriate in those countries that we need to evaluate data for, maybe for the recent past in China. And we've got an alternative. In those countries, we've got census information on children ever born, so at least 2 censuses, 3 censuses. We can even use survey data in there if we've only got one census and an earlier survey or a later survey. So we can use methods that are more flexible, and we can always use methods that are that have less strong assumptions on the when we can. By and large, I think the methods of evaluation and adjustment work better for births than they do for deaths. It seems from the experience yesterday that a lot of the methods are likely to work better in conditions of high mortality or high fertility than they are in low mortality or low fertility. What else? We need to keep in mind and do as much as we can to adjust for migration, because migration tends to play havoc, particularly with death distribution methods, but also to some extent for things like assessments of TIA-RET type assessments of fertility. In all of these analyses, we need to consider characteristics of the system, particularly the civil registration system, whether it's, for example, is it focused on urban areas? Is it much more effective in urban areas than it is in rural areas? And that will affect our confidence in any sort of adjustment. We need to remember that completeness is not uniform geographically, and we need to tread very carefully when we start disaggregating. We need to try to disaggregate, but we need to tread very carefully when we're disaggregating, partly because migration, if for nothing else, migration becomes, relatively speaking, a much more important component of what's going on. Something else I think that came out clearly from yesterday was the need to work on survey questions and survey procedures, census questions and census procedures. We need to do more experiments. So basically, it has become sort of accepted wisdom that if we're asking for information on lifetime fertility from women, we should ask 3 questions: children living at home, children living elsewhere, children that have died. We don't have the census back. There's no empirical basis for doing that, actually. And so it'd be nice to have an empirical basis for the way that we phrase and implement some of these questions. Well, I don't think you've got the evidence either. Well, I certainly haven't seen any evidence. And I think it applied again when we're trying to assess the completeness of the civil registration system. These questions, the questions that are being included in surveys, was this birth registered? Was the birth of this child registered? Again, we don't really know. We need experimentation in how to phrase those questions, and does it make a difference asking to see the birth certificate and so on. So there's a lot of things we don't really know that we sort of think sound plausible, but we really don't know whether it works or not. There was a bit of discussion both yesterday and today about when you've got a census question on household deaths, should we get the name of the person that died? I think it's obvious that we should get the name of the person that died, but again, there's no particular evidence for doing that. Coming back again to the methods working better at high mortality than low mortality, one of my reasons for thinking that was so was the slide that Damjan showed of regularities in patterns of ratios of early neonatal to post-neonatal mortality, where there was a very good correspondence for now low mortality populations when they had high mortality, up to about an infant mortality rate of about 20-25. After that, you get a huge spread, and so those regularities really don't seem to hold anymore. It's not clear why that is. We've got a few hunches as to why it may be. The amount of sudden infant death syndrome mortality varies across countries, for example, which pushes deaths out to older ages, but it's not entirely clear. What else? Oh, something else that struck me. 2 things that struck me yesterday. It was notable in terms of the methods that we're still using methods that were developed 30, 40 years ago. We're sort of introducing refinements with them. We're sort of tweaking them with different age trims and looking at cohort survival rather than some other things. But with a few exceptions, and I think Rob Dorrington was one of them, of using population, a very innovative way of using population register information, which is new. But Otherwise, even if it's incomplete, it can provide useful data. I think that's an important conclusion. But we're still using the same methods we were 30, 40 years ago. Another thing that has changed, I think, is that another thing that has changed is that the work that is being done in these areas, it used to be researchers in what I call high-income countries who were then exporting these methods to low- and middle-income countries. But this research is now being done in middle-income countries. I mean, it may be that what we've seen in this meeting is not really representative, but it's being dominated by South Africa and Brazil. And so the focus of this research has really shifted, and there's much less interest in it now in high-income countries, high-income universities, and it's gone to where it matters, which is middle-income countries and ultimately low-income countries. So I think that's a terrific.
May I interrupt you?
Yes.
May I ask, what specifically, can you give an example of some of these old methods which is not appropriate anymore? I mean,
I didn't say that. I'm just saying that we haven't had any new ones, Vladimir.
Oh, okay.
We've been testing. Yeah. So we've been tweaking with trims and simulations to say, well, this works better than that, but it's all working. But, for best distribution, we're still using gross balance, synthetic extinct generation, and combination. We haven't got anything really that has broken out of that mold. There's a bunch of these things out there that I can't believe the farm things.
So address what? Increasing importance of migration, for example?
Possibly, yes. Yeah. I mean, to address problems that we know are out that we know exist. What else? That was sort of more or less it, I think. Okay. Pet peeve. And yesterday we were talking a lot about indirect methods, and today we were talking about record linkage and calling that a direct method. I don't think record linkage is any more direct than gross balance or anything of that sort. Direct method is when you divide A by B and you get C, and once you start getting into uncertainties with linkages and all that sort of thing. So I think we need to call all these things indirect methods, and there's not some magic about direct methods. Okay, I think that's about it.
Thank you, Tim. Can I call now to Romesh and then after to Chalapati?
Great, thanks. I'll try to be quick. I think it's been our first record discussion. There was quite a lot of discussion about the importance of these kinds of now I'm very self-conscious I don't want to use the word direct. Record linkage methods to try to assess completeness at sub-national level is clearly an issue, and where it becomes extremely difficult to do this with the indirect methods without having really, really good migration data. So I think we can see in the literature that there's still a very, very heavy reliance when doing these record linkage studies and doing dual system estimates. We have some important discussions about moving beyond that, particularly to relax the very strong assumption of independence and being creative. And so in the spirit of multiple data sources, being creative and trying to mine, other data sources like formation ground records and these kinds of data sources which perhaps don't really fit, or not fit, but aren't really considered part of an official statistical system. They certainly could help us to understand the completeness and quality of statistical data. So, and then I think another thread that came out was at least in lower middle income countries, is heavy reliance on deterministic methods of matching. Although, our colleagues from Brazil in particular, gave some interesting lessons learned about the recent applications of probabilistic-based methods in Brazil, and I think that's actually a much deeper and broader literature from a number of efficient statistics agencies behind some countries, which perhaps could be enlightening and useful. So I think there's a lot of room there to mine these experiences from Brazil, and particularly from thinking of some of the work done, on indigenous populations in places like Australia and Canada, and using these kinds of record studies which incorporate those statements. One other key thread which came out of this, though, and I think this is a weakness in the literature, which really requires a lot more effort and focus, is the need for more explicit and nuanced quantification of error and uncertainty when undertaking these kinds of record linkage, dual system or multi-record estimation projects. And I think in order to do that, we have some discussions about really directly engaging the sort of very strong assumptions which underpin these kinds of dual system or multi-system estimation. So, in building on that, I think there's and in that, I think what there's scope to do a lot more work in terms of trying to quantify the uncertainty around actual decisions themselves and propagate that through to the continuous uncertainty around continuous estimates and ultimately population estimates, population parameters. I think Saleh gave us some intuition also in the design of his work in Oman, which really calls out for more sensitivity analysis, particularly around but also some of the other assumptions in this kind of record. So this is clearly an area as well. One thing which we ran out of time, but I had it in my notes, I'm going to try to stick it in here because I didn't get a chance to do it earlier. I don't know whether this extends to other parts of the world, but I've spent some time this year trying to figure out what data is available to do what existing data is available to do, more record linkage studies, even if it's just very preliminary at a small scale in the Western Asian region. And in the last 15 years, there's 6 censuses which have had the household death question, in the region, and they've selected men as individuals, and there's been zero record linkage work, even just to say, okay, let's take just a small area of subnational area and explore that. And so I'm curious, other people who are working in Africa, the Asia Pacific, Latin America, whether this is also the case. Certainly in Middle East and North Africa, we're not making full use of these available data, and so I think this is meaningful work, and I think it also links up to something which Karen was saying in the last session, where the synergy between people working in CIDS and population census is very important. And, I think we're asking if this is sort of broader, or is that sort of
maybe after Karen, if you can hold it for 2 minutes. So now, Chalapati for the second part.
Yeah, so in the second session this morning, we went through some of the country-specific studies on record linkage. I used the term dual record systems or DRS. I didn't say that at any time. I suppose, Ken, you might agree with DRS, a decision review system like is used in physics. But anyway, so the key issue there was the use of these, record linkage techniques in the Chinese DSP system. And I think we had a good discussion about the, challenges in establishing independence between the two systems, particularly in the Chinese context. And if I may transgress into your session, you did by talking about the probabilistic methods, so I'll do that. The Indian SRS experience, where they seem to acknowledge the lack of independence, and relying on sharing data, between the two sources and using a reconciled data set in estimating mortality, is potentially, one of the solutions in this situation, especially when we want to move into the multiple record systems, like what we observed from the Korean experience, where they looked at all the different sources to try and, pool up the data, and without applying any adjustments or assumptions in estimating events that have been missed, which is a questionable approach in itself. In any case, we did see that the Chinese system applies the adjustment, and even though there might be some correlation between the two data sources, and it's quite illuminating also from my review, and again this is something you might bring up later in the discussion, that over the past 2 decades, the level of incompleteness in the Chinese DSP from these 3 yearly surveys which have been done has stayed around the 15% mark. One would think that lessons learned from such applications might move towards improving the quality of data and increase the percentages of completeness. So that's also an important issue, that maybe it's the correlation which is actually causing this persistence of the estimate. But anyway, these are just random thoughts from a random mind, so you don't need to worry too much about it. Moving on to the Thai experience, I thought it was quite good to see, the persistence of the Thai researchers in applying the dual record systems methodology in 3 different, environments. They did it from the SPC, they did it from, an HDFS environment, and then they also applied it in the universal health coverage, to estimate what's happening in the hospital beds. So that also is, a good, I think, lesson that we've learned, that, we can try and apply the same methodology in trying to exploit any available data source, or looking at any potential, avenue for applying the record linkage to try and estimate the completeness. And again, over there are questions of, when they use the 13-digit identity number as the sole variable for the linkage, that can create, false positives and false negatives, because a 13-digit number is prone to, some degree of error in reporting. And the second issue is, as in the principles of dual record systems, it's important to have a follow-up, the verification of at least a sample of the cases, if not all, which is what is practiced in the SRS as well as in the DSP, where there's a field verification of the event. And it would be, interesting to know and, or at least implement some degree of field verification of the matched cases or unmatched cases to verify the event. I think those were the main points. Apart from that, Romesh already spoke about the value of the probabilistic method. There's the issue of the rec file software. What was it called? RecLink software. RecLink software that Eliana spoke about, which would have some very important, uses for, the probabilistic methodology implementation in different countries. And again, as I said, the importance of pursuing data quality, which we saw from the Korean experience, in making the last, infant death count, in measuring the mortality rate. I think those are the important issues.
Thank you. Karen?
Not to the last question, but most of it's already said. So, a couple of additional points. I think what we've proven today is that, over the last couple of days, is that all the methods suffer from problems with the source data, both the availability of and the quality of the source data, and the evidence proof. Obviously, we're not separate the conversation from this question coming from as much as what we have available to work with. That it does fit into the broader system work, and a lot of that system work is very subjective, as are a lot of our results, and we need to find some ways of actually bridging that capacity gap between the academic work around assessing completeness and talking to countries around what does that mean for their data, so that when we get to we don't know that it sounds plausible. How do we have that discussion at a level that is usable at a country level? So they don't just go, okay, well, it's an academic question. So how do we build the capacity in countries, maybe not in all countries, to actually engage in this analysis, but actually have the conversation with the academics around the analysis and what it means for them. We have to make sure we're keeping in mind the final uses, so we're at nominated farm data, but it's not 30 1%. By specific. And I think probably just a little bit with a comment that Dimitri made in his presentation, which is, I think, probably my favorite quote of the whole 2 days. Standardized approaches to finding use case. How do we build in as much standardization around our approaches and questions to the DHSs, all of the methods that we're talking about, but still put them into those national contexts or sub-national contexts.
Thank you. So maybe before John Wilmoth, our director, comes to close the meeting, maybe for maybe 10-15 minutes, we can have a bit more kind of an overall brief open discussion about the next steps. But to recap a little bit, the plan that we have as a part of to build on this meeting and all the materials that have been presented over these 2 days, we are going to prepare a report, as we do usually for all our expert group meetings, where we bring together a bit of a summary of what has been presented in the meeting. And in this context, as part of the different guidelines that we shared with you in planning for this meeting, we had a set of questions that we have asked you to focus on in preparing your presentations or your contributions. And some of you have been more diligent in addressing very specifically some of these questions. Some others have been more, let's say, broad in answering some of those questions. But it's fine. No problem. The thing is, as you have seen, we had over 25 different presentations and contributions. So it's a very rich set of materials we have received, and we still expect eventually more contributions from some of you. But what we want to do is to bring together and kind of give a synthesis of this information, especially in terms of some of the, let's say, lessons learned or recommendations or feedback that each of you have eventually made in some of your contributions, either through your slides or eventually your papers. And to circulate back to all of you within the next couple of weeks, once we have put back in a kind of relatively concise and organized way all of these materials, to get back your feedback on this set of recommendations and advices that are building on either country-specific experience or eventually broader experience that some of you have presented or discussed. In preparation to this meeting, we also had asked Chalapati to work on a background technical paper that he has been working on, and what he has presented in his this morning is building on that background paper, that like a review synthesis paper that he has been preparing for this meeting. It's a work in progress because, as you have seen from his presentation, it tries to be as to encompass and be as comprehensive as possible to give a broad picture of the landscape and the experience, and we hope within probably the next 1 or 2 months to get to a stage where we have a version of this technical paper we can circulate for comments and feedback. And we will be happy to get, in this context, more feedback from some of you. And as part of that technical paper, we would very likely probably get back to some of you, especially involved with some of these record linkage or validation studies, to get more specific examples or aspects to include in that background document. The other thing is, and that would be part of this kind of compilation of experience and information. But as you forget who mentioned, but someone mentioned the over-representation from Brazil and from South Africa. Actually, it's kind of a new acronym. You have the BRIC, and the BRICS, this is the PICs. Russia is not so strongly represented in that group, but you have Brazil, India, China, and South Africa that are predominantly kind of present in this meeting. And if you look at it, there are maybe some reasons why. It's because there is an interaction, there is a critical mass of researchers, of academics in some of these countries who have been interacting with the national authorities to analyze this data, to have access to this data, and to be able to do not just let's say passive consumption of this information, but to question the data, to use them for analytical purposes, to eventually do some of this more intensive kind of in-depth investigations. And that brings the issue basically of this kind of community of exchange and access between researchers, national researchers with national authorities involved with data production. The more there is potential for this interaction, the greater there is for improvement of the system and eventually of the information and eventually of the process in each of these countries. And hopefully some of the lessons from some of these countries that have been more eventually forthcoming in doing this intellectual production and evaluation can be used as lessons to build on for other countries. And personally, I found very interesting the experience presented for Thailand that has gone through different phases of different type of evaluation, going from dual systems to simple questions in survey and questionnaire, and trying again eventually dual validations. So the more countries are trying it, as Karen and others have mentioned, not just one thing, but eventually multiple approaches, the more there is potential eventually to get better data and eventually to use this data in more effective way. Karen has prepared a couple of slides that are quite rich. I'm not sure we are going to be able to go through all the details that she has put together, but as part of the follow-up to this meeting, together with Statistics Division, there are a number of follow-up activities that we are planning to do, which is more to kind of put together, beyond some technical papers, some more operational guidelines. And everyone who has been involved, especially at the country or regional level, in providing support for capacity building with local authorities, we would like really to build on this experience And maybe I should leave it to Karen to orient, to give a kind of a roadmap of some of these slides that you have prepared. But we are going to circulate them and kind of use some of these materials to organize some of the reflection that we have collected over the last 2 days. Any particular slide that you would like me to bring before John close the meeting?
Everything up there has been covered in one way or another, other than perhaps we haven't talked so much about the last 2 years, the international community, and particularly the resource representation. We've been sort of been in the discussions of things.
So, as you have seen in the last 2 days, there was a lot of very specific advices, recommendations, lessons learned. I think we need to spend a bit more time to bring together in a more kind of organized and structured way all these materials and to circulate it back to you and get back your feedback and build on this to have a more comprehensive and organized set of materials. Before John give the last word to John for this meeting, do you have yourself any comments for the next, let's say, 5-10 minutes that you would like to discuss, or to, if you have questions that you would like us to answer in respect to what we plan to do for after this meeting, please?
Very easy to improve. If you put the schedule of studies, it will be part of 2 months. This one doesn't stop anything.
Kirill, as you know, if you look at the list of the SDGs, so one of the last SDG, and among the different targets and goals, and indicators, some of them are related to strengthening the statistical capacity of countries. No. Look at.
It's much more.
Vladimir.
I just wanted to bring your attention to the following point, that actually most of this meeting, and this is very good, was devoted to taking where it is difficult to find this A and B to divide into 5 and to get some T directly, like a definite or secretary. But what happens if there are A and B, like we have in Europe or in some other places in the world? And I think what Dimitri showed, and also this is quite obvious, that in this area there are also challenges, and quite important ones. First is a lack of horizontal consistency. So the estimates are used for some country which is absolutely developed member of European Union, like Bulgaria or Germany, and you suddenly see that there is a jump in population. So why actually this jump has not been removed from the data? Is there anyone? I mean, of course, we are doing our job in the HMD, but HMD is just kind of special place where we have to pay special care about this data. But why don't we care? Why don't we actually 90% of work has been done. Why not to do the last 10% and to make everything consistent, in different ways, like in horizontal and in vertical across countries. And there is a new challenge of new migration. So the new migration is the migration where, you do not formally actually move. You do not cut all links to your whole country. Or you are partly registered in one place and partly in the other one. And so people are moving like that across the world. And this creates bias in population estimate. So I think it's a new growing thing which should be addressed. And then there are new challenges at all ages. We did not mention it here, but the population aging, it's not only increase in numbers of people older than 60 or 10. It's increase in numbers of people who are older than 85 and 90 and even 100. So how far this process will go? This is a new challenge for the data because these people at very old ages were born a lot of time ago in places with very poor quality of registration of birth. So their age is questionable and so on. So we should do something about this. And finally, importance of subnational level. Because it's already leading to Millennium Development Goals and other likely things that, the issue of equality, disparity, contrast, and so on. So, at least some step down to territorial, regional, and to socioeconomic stuff. How can we do it? I think these are kind of things which are coming quite quickly into the scope and will be already in our agenda, but tomorrow will be very much on our agenda.
Thank you. Ken?
When I first saw the structure of this meeting, I thought it was very appropriate that it should be sponsored by the Republic of Korea, because the Republic of Korea is one of the fairly small number of countries that has seen a really dramatic improvement in civil registration system over the last 40 years. And if we are serious about improving the quality of civil registration system, I think there's something to be said for focusing on success stories and trying to figure out why some countries have succeeded and some haven't. Another example is South Africa, where the system has improved dramatically over an even shorter period of time. So we do have success stories, and we draw lessons from those success stories.
Anyone else? Anyone who want to write this paper? I don't want to write the paper, but I do have a quick comment which partly builds on what Ken just said, and something Karen was talking about earlier this afternoon. I think she made this very important observation, which is worth harping on, which is the censuses and surveys of periodic data collection efforts for a civil registration system, where routine continuous data systems which need constant attention and support and engagement. And I'm going to quote Karen a lot here. And the other thing that she said at the start of yesterday is in her introductory comments, mentioning sort of three parameters of coverage, completeness, and quality. And I think we've spent a lot of time the last 2 days talking about completeness and data quality. Sort of skipped over coverage for many reasons, but I think it's worth coming back to. And I want to come back to it, to make a parallel to what I think is an important set of frameworks which people in the household survey networks and census networks have developed. In survey, we have this framework of total survey error, and census is very detailed, frameworks around what census quality looks like, and then attached to all of those is these sort of what I
think that at least in the survey are what's called paradata, sort of process information about how these data are actually generated. We know what that looks like in terms of survey methodology. There's a lot of guidelines and detailed standards in terms of talking about pilot testing or survey instruments and how the survey field operations were conducted, what the response rates look like, how the data processing is done, and data quality and adjustment, all of these kinds of things. So to come back to how this connects to coverage, I found it quite fascinating, again, at least in the Western Asian region, that it's actually quite hard to get any meaningful information about coverage. And getting meaningful information about coverage certainly helps you think more, at a more granular level when you're trying to, analyze completeness and quality issues of civil registration data. And so, I mentioned to Patrick earlier today that, for me, I've often wondered whether, there's a need to, further develop or extend some of the principles of representation of biodiversity to really just outline the need for this standard information about, how many, civil registrars are there in countries, and where are they located, and that. And because also these civil registration systems are changing over time. And so, this is information which actually needs to be updated as we continue to evaluate the developments and changes in civil registration systems. So I think I just wanted to give a plug to this issue which we talked about at the start of yesterday, coverage, which I think is not really very well addressed in the field yet. And in some sense, you could think about it as a low-hanging fruit. There's very active work being done right now. Tim talked to us about the sort of the work that Data for Health is doing in terms of these assessments. WHO has a comprehensive assessment. A lot of this information is actually being actively collected. Simply, it just needs for it to be collated into a repository and then updated over time so that as people engage with data and try to evaluate consistence and quality, they can connect it back to issues of coverage.
Thank you. Second.
Really encourage strengthening the relationship with regions. I can only talk about it yesterday, actually. There's not been a sort of natural growth for some of the security. There's people that sit in a lot of places, Minnesota and those sorts of division. But actually some of this broader, CRBS and work with a multi-sectoral thing. And so strengthening those relationships, particularly with the regions that have these improvement plans that are underway and that are working on.
Thank you. John, would you like to have the last word?
Well, I'm just looking at my colleagues and just think there's debate and comments too on some of these.
Thank you very much. I feel comfortable to make it question here. Simply, I would like to share with you a few information regarding the way that we're going to approach this meeting and the excellent, I would say, compendium of many methods that we presented here in terms of addressing the quality from the civil registration system. And as I mentioned this morning, the United Nations Statistics Division is the focal point for developing international standards, including the set of manuals and handbooks that accompany this volunteer, which focus on very specific areas of civil administration, for example, on legal framework, or manual that has legal framework for civil administration, together with the model civil administration law. There is another one that is focusing on the operation of the civil administration system, including the number of staff, their dispersion around the country. And we are right now in the process of updating the manual on the functioning of management and the functioning of civil administration system. And as I said, this convention that we can write here represents a major input to the revision process of this standard. The manual therefore focus on the function monitoring registration system, on the quality assessment of the system together with the direct or indirect methods in terms of assessing the quality of the microsystem. In part of this population division, simply because a meeting like this was long overdue. We did that when we were preparing for many times, a long time ago. And the meeting like this, indeed, was long overdue, and we are welcoming it. We believe that this is again some represent a critical part of our thinking, how we are going to go together towards providing the country not only with the physical recommendations, but even exact tools, exact guidelines, how to proceed in terms of producing regular annual relevant statistics. The principle that we are pushing from the very beginning is a systematic approach. This is indeed an area that involves a number of different institutions. So the solution idea must be system-wide. That means if the civil administration does not function, there is no right to statistics. If the civil administration functions, but it's not used to statistical office programs, you don't have right to statistics, which is the case in fact that we function as but here. Then if you have both of them functioning, but then coming up with different results, again, something. In the middle of it, we have population registers, and below them, we have now emerging the agencies for management of events. So all of this is part and parcel of the same foundation. And when we provide solutions, and we provide recommendations, and we provide guidelines to countries, we have to take all of them into consideration. That makes the job much more difficult. But again, as I said, this meeting and the input that we occurred here will be one of the major stones that we're going to put into the build-up of those tools that we will offer the country in terms of solution of CLES for 20%.
Thank you. Oh, Raj, as a...
Yeah. No, I still not said my thing on the Indian Commission. No, I think that this workshop is excellent because we have a range of ideas of how you evaluate the justification and what the policy. And the question is, how do you implement once you have this tool? Because when you have the principles and recommendations, what the regional commission has clearly, we use it as no gold standard, and then try to put it in the tools, whether it's the WHO tool, whether it's the Africa tool, but that is the set that we measure each time we do. So now if we have a very systematic and systemic approach to this, through a political organization structure. Now, if this is we have this, then how do we implement it? And how do we, because countries, if you give it to countries, the countries will not be able to do it. So you have to build capacity in regional institutions, like the demographic institution. Like I know for Africa, Cairo demographic institution, people are India and build this as a curriculum and try to bring in service. So you have to have a strategy for even the of what you're trying to do. I think it has to be systematic and systematic. That's the next step that we have to take. Because we know how to implement the principles of that. That's very clear. But I think we have to have a strategy.
I agree with you. Just as a kind of background supplement to all of this, as some of you may be aware, there is an ongoing effort, for example, again with the support of the government of Korea, but this time including with also, I believe, the World Bank and a wide range of partners in developing, for example, also e-learning curriculum designed to strengthen national capacities in many different countries or regions of the world on different aspects of what Surgeon was speaking about, and I forget how many modules, 15, 16, I forget, I have lost track. It's many different modules covering different aspects of the whole system, and eventually this aspect that we just touched in the today and yesterday is only eventually one aspect of a module, or eventually something that would be related to one of these modules, whether it's about birth or about death. But in that context, as you know, when it comes to capacity building, especially in this new age of technology and innovation, there are eventually a variety of means and options that keep evolving very fast. And there are many possibilities, and as you must have seen, there is already a range of options that exist, and the question is more how to get more people to be able to build on or to use them as effectively as possible, depending the context where they are. Thank you, Ras. Sharon?
Thank you everyone for being here. As it was pointed out earlier, it was recognized by in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It was recognized that birth registration is a crucial mechanism for providing legal identity to persons. And we noted at the start of the meeting that such identity is essential for inclusive participation in modern society, including for access to services and services that are often provided by the state, such as education, healthcare. And as mentioned in my opening remarks, this aspect related to legal identity is one motivation for addressing the issues that have been covered by this meeting. Your focus, however, has been mostly on the statistical side, how to ensure that registration data are sufficient in terms of quality and completeness and coverage so that they can be used successfully for monitoring population trends. In that regard, in April of 2016, the Commission on Population and Development adopted a resolution on strengthening the demographic evidence base for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That resolution considered all of the major forms of demographic data, and with regard to registration data, the Commission urged governments, quote, to strengthen systems for the universal, reliable, and timely registration of births, marriages, divorces, and deaths, among other vital events, for linking the registration of vital events with the production of vital statistics, and for assessing and improving over time the coverage, timeliness, and accuracy of data generated by such systems, and to promote the use of civil registration for collecting information on causes of death in accordance with the International Classification of Diseases established by the World Health Organization. So, for various reasons, improving the quality and completeness of vital statistics data derived from civil registration has great importance. Over the past 2 days, you have deliberated on the methodologies and lessons learned from the experiences of the available studies. I regret truly that other events have prevented me from attending most of the sessions here, but nevertheless, my colleagues have informed me that the discussions have contributed greatly to our understanding of the existing state of knowledge with regard to analytical methods for use at both the national and subnational levels, in particular for low and middle income countries. The meeting also reviewed recent progress and experiments in OECD countries and in various developing countries, focusing on the use of validation studies based on record linkage that have been used to assess the completeness and quality of birth and death records. The Population Division intends to prepare a report summarizing the conclusions of the meeting, the lessons learned, and any recommendations based on the evidence presented and the discussions at the meeting. The results of the meeting will contribute to the preparation, together with the UN Statistics Division, of a new UN handbook providing operational guidelines for the evaluation of the geographic coverage of civil registration and of the completeness and quality of vital statistics data derived from civil registration at the national and subnational levels. In that context, I intend to call soon for a meeting with the director of the Statistics Division to bring together the two teams to consider the way forward on this larger project. And in that regard, this meeting has been really good stimulation for pushing us both, I think, to move forward in this work. This meeting was made possible by the support provided to the Population Division by Statistics Korea. So once again, I would like to thank the government of the Republic of Korea for financing this expert group meeting. I also wish to thank all of my colleagues in the Population Division, led by Patrick Gerland, for their skill and commitment, that they have shown in organizing this meeting. I also want to thank all of you as participants for being here, for all of the contributions that you have made to this discussion, especially to those who have traveled from far corners of the earth in order to be here and to participate in this meeting. On behalf of the Population Division, just let me say that we are well aware that your contribution to this work is done on your own time and often even partly at your own expense. And for that, we are truly grateful, and we appreciate the time that you take and, in general, your commitment to participating in the international discussion of these issues at the United Nations. I wish all of you a safe return home, and I look forward to seeing you again in the near future, whether it's in Chicago, Johannesburg, New York, Geneva, or elsewhere. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Yeah.